Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
This is KRWG Public Media, TV, radio, online. News that matters. Now, across the Mesilla Valley and the borderland, the stories that shape our community. From the KRWG Broadcast Center at New Mexico State University, this is Newsmakers.
Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Jonny Coker. On today's episode, we're taking an in-depth look at Spaceport America and the New Mexico Spaceport Authority. Has the spaceport been a successful public investment? And how will Virgin Galactic's regular launches affect the local economy? I have more in this report. In the high desert southeast of Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, crowds cheered on the crew of Virgin Galactic's suborbital spaceplane as it ascended through Earth's atmosphere. The launch marked the company's second commercial spaceflight, crewed by 3 of the company's first private astronauts out of New Mexico's publicly funded Spaceport America. With Virgin Galactic commencing regular commercial spaceflights out of the spaceport, proponents say that it can bring a lot of economic opportunity for New Mexicans, but some in the surrounding communities aren't so convinced. Jeff Ducat, a business owner in TRC, said that the spaceport hasn't lived up to his expectations.
A lot of people feel that, well, we were ignored. We end up paying the highest sales tax to support it, but we get the least benefit from it. And unless you're coming down from Albuquerque, you don't go through TRC or near it. And that's pretty much what's happened here. We were supposed to have a welcome center that really hasn't materialized yet. And that's all I could basically say about it. It's kind of a big letdown other than, gee, they're finally flying out of there after, 23 years?
Spaceport America was initially built with nearly $220 million in public funds, with $142.1 million allocated by the state of New Mexico and $76.4 million generated by local spaceport gross receipt taxes from Doña Ana and Sierra County. Scott McLaughlin, executive director of the New Mexico Spaceport Authority, said that although growth has been slower than expected, he believes that the state has the opportunity to become one of the biggest markets in the aerospace industry. In the same way that the tech industry took hold in California's Silicon Valley, McLaughlin said that New Mexico could become the world's, quote, space valley.
When you look at the types of jobs and the number of jobs here, especially in aerospace or technology, that's not that much different from 20 years ago. What the spaceport does in terms of Space Valley and trying to build up the aerospace ecosystem is completely unique. You can go do other things infrastructure-wise, but that doesn't set fire to the economy. It doesn't do things that create a whole new industry in the area, and that's what's different about Spaceport America. We're trying to ignite a whole new industry across Albuquerque to El Paso that can hopefully result in thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs in the future. It's going to take some time, but we have to stay the steady course to be able to do this, and we're in good shape right now. Things are moving in the right direction.
McLaughlin said that while Virgin Galactic is the main tenant at the spaceport, more effort is going into attracting other companies in order to diversify their operations. Additionally, he said that the Spaceport Authority, in partnership with NMSU's Center for Border Economic Development, will soon release an economic impact report that will give taxpayers a reason to be optimistic.
Right now we have about 6 different tenants. We hope to add another 1 or 2 in the next 6 months or so. And those are what we call tenants, are those who are leasing land for long-term, several years. We also have lots of short-term customers who come and they may stay with us only a week or 2 and do some flights or do some other experiments.
But according to Doña Ana County Commissioner Shannon Reynolds, Spaceport America isn't creating the economic environment that was promised when it was initially pitched to Doña Ana and Sierra County.
If we measure the success based on the numbers and the number of jobs it's created, and the amount of revenue it's actually created for Doña Ana County as an example, I'd say that we're falling short of what our expectations were and what we need in order to be profitable.
Commissioner Reynolds, who sits on the New Mexico Spaceport Authority Tax Board, said that from his perspective, the money could have been better spent elsewhere.
When I think about $150 million in tax dollars over a 20-year period of time, which is what we're talking about, I could use that there's a lot of other things I could do here in the county with that money. I mean, we are struggling with infrastructure, with sewer systems, with transportation, with health care. and both mental and general health care, and we also have food deserts. I mean, I believe that money properly spent in order to encourage economic development here in the county, I believe we'll get a lot larger return on that investment through those mechanisms than we will from the spaceport directly.
Meanwhile, in Sierra County, Jeff Ducat said that while the spaceport hasn't lived up to his expectations, there's still hope that the regularly scheduled launches could inject some life into the TRC economy.
I would like to see the Spaceport Commission actually have a visitor center that's open that we can supply with goods and stuff. I'd like to see the people of TRC, now that we have some money available, start building infrastructure, have more places for people to stay. It's a great showcase for truth or consequences, but you got to come in here.
While many in the aerospace industry consider Virgin Galactic's regularly scheduled commercial flights a success, some in the surrounding communities are hoping for a bigger spark in the local economy. Joining us now to talk about Spaceport America is the director of the New Mexico Spaceport Authority, Scott McLaughlin. Scott, thanks so much for being here today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's just jump right into it. At Spaceport America, Virgin Galactic has finally started its regular commercial launches. So how has that transformed sort of what's going on at the spaceport? How have things changed operationally on a daily basis for y'all?
Well, I mean, we already have lots of other customers. We have some tenants who are there. We have other customers who come and go. So it's just increased the tempo. It's not anything dramatic. 2 years ago, we supported Virgin Galactic twice for launches to space, successful launches to space. That was when they had their final test flight, and then they had Sir Richard Branson. And then 2 years later, now we've had 4 launches this year. So the cadence of once a month is something new to us, though, and it's keeping us on our toes.
So, and I know you mentioned other tenants, but for the moment, I just want to talk a little bit about Virgin Galactic. You've been the director of the Spaceport Authority for a little over 2 years now. So since you've joined up, how has the relationship between Virgin Galactic and the spaceport evolved in that time?
Well, I mean, the relationship with Virgin Galactic and the state, I work for the state of New Mexico, of course, has been an ongoing partnership. Going back to Governor Richardson working with Sir Richard Branson to get the deal set, and then working with the legislature to get the statute passed that created the spaceport authority, and then of course the counties. So and Virgin's been there the whole time, right? And of course everybody thought, Virgin thought, the governor then thought, and people since then, that things were going to move faster. And in that time, the relationship perhaps has gone up and down a little bit, but that partnership has always been the same, that we wanted to see Virgin Galactic be successful. We wanted to see them fly, and we were doing everything we could as a state and as the spaceport to help them succeed. And of course, Virgin Galactic needed a spaceport. They need a place to fly. They need our FAA license. They need our relationship with White Sands Missile Range. So it's been a good relationship, and now it's just gotten even more solid now that we're in regular operations and regular flight.
I see. And I know Virgin Galactic grabs a lot of the headlines and things like that, but another interesting tenant you have, I want to talk a little more about other tenants. Tell me about Spin Launch. Tell me about their stake at Spaceport America and their technology. As an engineer yourself, how are things going with Spin Launch so far?
Yeah, Spin Launch is a very interesting company. So if you look at the old Saturn V, everybody's seen pictures of the Saturn V. Well, something like 90% of the rocket, the weight of the rocket, is fuel and engines to get it into orbit and back again. And that's what it takes to get out of the gravity well of Earth. What Spin Launch is doing is they're part of a class of launch systems called kinetic systems that are trying to generate the kinetic energy on the ground, so you essentially don't have to take that first stage with you. So the system they've developed is this evacuated centrifuge that is as tall as the Statue of Liberty. They evacuate it, and they have an arm inside of it that spins potentially up to Mach 5. So what they built at Spaceport America in New Mexico was a 1/3 scale version of what they want to build out somewhere else. And this 1/3 scale version will get them suborbitally up to about 100 kilometers, 60 miles or something. So they started building just before the pandemic and stayed on site, and they've completed several tests since then. And they recently just got a partnership with a large company in Japan to keep their research and development going.
And again, as an engineer yourself, how do you view this technology? Do you think it could be transformative into the future as a sort of main way that satellites get in orbit and things like that? Do you see that as viability?
There are other kinetic systems that people are working on. Some of them involve a large pipe full of gas that you can ignite the gas, so it's essentially like a gun, and that would act as the first stage. So all of these things have never been tried before, just like Virgin Galactic having regular operations to space. So the spaceport, almost all of our customers are early stage companies, early stage technologies, and they're all trying to do something that hasn't been done before. So when I look at my engineering background, of course, I'm fascinated with how this is done and how to make it better and how to succeed. On the business side, I was a businessman for a while. Also, I'm looking at where do you develop the cash? You have to have revenue. You have to have cash to succeed. So I look at these companies on both sides and understand that they need funding, they need support, and that's why they came here, and that's why we want up the spaceport. We're not going to see every company that comes to the spaceport develop into something major, but that we're here to try and capture those early market companies and see them stay in New Mexico and hopefully get some jobs for all of us.
I see. So, and you talk about those other companies, UP Aerospace, AeroVironment, Prismatic, companies like that. How big of an impact do these companies have on the Spaceport Authority and Spaceport America as compared to Virgin Galactic?
So, Virgin Galactic is paying both a lease fee for the building that the state of New Mexico built for them, the beautiful gateway to space and the facilities, and then they pay kind of a user fee for the operations they have. And there's no doubt that the bulk of our revenue from customers comes from Virgin Galactic. It's, on the order of over $4 million a year or more. So the smaller customers that are coming and going, they're filling in revenue gaps and helping us complete the revenue. So we have a business model, but of course we still get $4 million for the state for operations approximately. But several of these companies that you mentioned, a few of them are, we hope, planning on long-term presence in New Mexico, maybe even some manufacturing and long-term operations. So we're helping them in the early stage, by having them at the spaceport, but we hope that they may be here for the long term and we get some jobs out of it, some long-term jobs.
I see. And when it comes to securing new tenants of these upcoming companies like you described, as the director of the Spaceport Authority, what is your role in attracting these companies and securing contracts and things like that?
Well, any company that's involved in sales, you might hear somebody in the company say everybody in the company is involved in sales. And the meaning of that is that it doesn't matter whether it's the janitor or somebody in accounting or an engineer or someone specifically focused on business development. Everybody needs to be welcoming, and everybody needs to make sure that what you're trying to sell is good for the customer, and the customer has a good reason to be there. And that goes for Las Cruces and the state of New Mexico too. So we're trying to be welcoming, and my role is to make sure that they know that the spaceport is a welcoming place, that New Mexico wants them here, Las Cruces wants them here, TRC wants them here. And then I work with our Director of Business Development to actually create a plan of action for bringing those folks in. If it's long-term presence, that means picking out a site, working out utilities, all the things that they need to succeed. If it's a short-term presence, maybe a week, maybe a couple months, then we still work out all the logistics of what they need to operate. But as the executive director, I'm also very focused on what happens in Santa Fe, looking at my budget, looking at personnel, looking at any statutes that help or hurt the spaceport, funding issues. So it's a complex place. I've never actually worked at any place quite as complex as the spaceport.
I could see why there's so many spinning plates, I suppose, when it comes to the spaceport. And I know, across the United States, I believe there's 20 spaceports now popping up somewhere around there. Yep. And nationally, there's, all over the world they're popping up.
Right.
So how does Spaceport America distinguish itself, compared to this growing competition?
So technically there's only 14 licensed spaceport. There are some other private sites, like the one in Van Horn, Texas, that's run by Blue Origin, is considered a private launch site. Okay. But they're not multi-user. So Van Horn and Blue Origin can launch the New Shepard, for example, but they can't really do anything else unless they do further work with the FAA. So what stands out about Spaceport America is we have a vertical launch license, we have a horizontal launch license, and we're also working on a reentry license. And those licenses are not just suborbital. Those licenses from the FAA allow us to go to space and to come back from space. We expect to have a reentry license sometime in the next 6 months, is what I hope. And so we're the only only commercial spaceport with both a vertical and a horizontal launch license. But we are an inland spaceport, so when we look at some of these other ones that are active that you've talked about, like say Wallops Island, Virginia, or of course Cape Canaveral or Vandenberg or Alaska, what you see are sites that can launch over water. And because they can launch over water, that means they don't have to launch over people, which means they can handle dangerous or higher risk operations than we can. We're an inland spaceport, so if we want to go to orbit, and that means we're going to have what's called overflight. Eventually, we're going to fly over people at some point going east. So that means the vehicles we have that would go to orbit are going to have to be almost as safe as an airliner that flies over us every day. So we think that's the future. It's 5, 10, 15 years out, but there's no doubt that we're going to run out of launch capacity at Cape Canaveral and other sites. And as the vehicles become safer, they're going to start looking at inland launch sites. The only other choice is to go overseas, and nobody wants them to do that. The FAA doesn't want to do it. Congress doesn't want them to do it. We want those launch systems to stay here in the United States so we get the economic benefit.
I see. So, and speaking of economics, the Arrowhead Center, at New Mexico State University recently released a report on Spaceport America and the economic impact that it's had in the state. To you, what was the most important part of that report? What was the most informative part, I suppose?
So, excuse me. There were two parts that I liked the most. It was an economic impact for the year 2022. And there were two big takeaways on that. One was about 810 jobs. I think it was 811 jobs. And that includes the direct jobs, indirect, and induced jobs. And so those are all the jobs that are created because of the spaceport. It doesn't mean that they're working at the spaceport or working for one of our customers, because if you have people working at the spaceport, you still need someone to work on the elevators, or you need someone to work at the grounds, and eventually that trickles down to more people in the grocery store. So the way the Center for Border Economic Development calculated this is you do wind up, and this was an independent study, by the way, the spaceport paid for it, but it was up to the Arrowhead and the Center for Border Economic Development to actually run the numbers. So they came up with 810 jobs, so that's great. The other thing I liked about it was the $60 million in value added, and so what that is new money into the economy. That means in 1 year, $60 million was injected into the economy for that year. So we are going to work on more cumulative studies where we look back in time. And our plan is to do one every year from here forward, so the public and we always know what the impact is, and it also helps us decide where to focus the spaceport in terms of customers.
Sure. And I did see some reporting done about some representatives within the state being skeptical of the numbers, with it being a spaceport-sponsored study. So I just would like to give you a moment to respond to those critics. What would you say to them?
Well, I mean, they are what they are. There's nobody in the chain of command here that influenced the numbers to be extra positive. I mean, this really was the study. The folks at the center, again at the Center for Border and Economic Development, are very focused on creating standalone research projects that they did, like this thing. They've also done other, if you go to their website, they've also done other studies. They have no incentive, I mean, there's no incentive for them to do anything but to get it right. I guess the implication with that was that there was an incentive for the spaceport or some of our customers to do something to pump it up a little bit, but I don't really have that incentive either. That's not good for me. I'm not going to lie to the public. I'm not going to lie to our politicians, our policymakers. And Virgin Galactic, our biggest customer, is a publicly traded company. Any number that they put out that is a false number can get them in trouble. So it's simply not true. The study is what the study is. Now, the model that was used in plan, which is a commonly used way to calculate these numbers, it does do some interesting things. For example, it pushed a few more of the jobs into Sierra County than I think actually exist. I think those jobs exist in Doñana County. But the way in-plan works is it focuses on where the activity occurred, and because the activity occurred in Sierra County, it tends to put the jobs there. So that's something we're going to work with CBED at to make sure we get a little better granularity on that. But I think it's the real thing. We've had 45,000 visitors at the spaceport in the last year, and a huge number of vehicles. So we know the foot traffic is there. We know what's happening, and of course we did go to space. Virgin Galactic went to space for 4 times. So we know this year. So we know that activity is actually occurring, even if it's hard to see.
And I know you mentioned Virgin Galactic being a publicly traded company, so it's imperative that they're very transparent about these types of things for investors
Right.
and things like that. However, in recent weeks, Virgin Galactic has been trading at, I believe, its lowest point ever, lowest price ever. Is that something you pay attention to? Do you think that's something that's significant as they are the biggest tenant at Spaceport America? What is your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a direct correlation, but stock price can indicate whether a company has access to money, capital to do their thing. So in their quarterly updates that Virgin Galactic does, we know they said they have over $900 million in capital and assets to get them through the next few years, building the Delta-class spaceships and get to the point where they can start operating weekly. And so we have a lot of confidence that they'll get there. And in terms of the stock price, I think there was a lot of speculation in the very beginning. The stock was offered as part of a SPAC, and I think we've seen several SPACs jump up and then fall back down again, and I think this is what we saw with Virgin. But I do think there is a little bit of low confidence in the long-term business model, and you can see that reflected in that stock price. But there's also a cadence right now, and again, Virgin Galactic has talked about the revenue per flight. And when you look at that cadence over the next year, a couple of years, and before they get the Delta-class spaceships, and you look at the revenue they get, they're definitely going to be burning cash as they build out their fleet and getting ready for increased operations. But the beauty is they're not really competing with anybody else. The only other competitor in the suborbital market is Blue Origin with the New Shepard. Most of the studies I've read about space tourism indicate that there are plenty of people who want to try and do this thing and go to space. So their ability to capture the market that will sustain them over the long term, and we're talking, maybe up to a decade or more, I think that's there. So I think we'll eventually see a sound business model.
I see. So I understand that the Spaceport Authority is looking at receiving a big federal grant that y'all called transformative in a press release. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I love talking about this because we applied for something from the Economic Development Agency, Build Back Better. It was part of the stimulus early in the Biden administration, and we won that grant with the partners in Albuquerque. That was with something we put together called the Space Valley Coalition. And so our partners are in Albuquerque, but the idea with Space Valley is that Space Valley extends from Los Alamos to El Paso. And what we're trying to do is capture together all of those assets and advertise those assets and say that a company can come here or the government can enact a program here, and whether you want to do manufacturing or whether you want to do research and design, you have this valley from Albuquerque to El Paso to enact that and to go into business. So the most recent grant, and the most recent grant we applied for is this National Science Foundation Regional Engine Grant. And the reason I like it is because we couldn't have really succeeded in applying for it without the spaceport. And I'm not trying to brag about me in the spaceport. I'm trying to brag about the fact that a spaceport exists, the fact that we have a license, that we have a site where people can test, where people can operate, where companies can do something that you really can't do in the middle of nowhere unless you have that spaceport license. That is an enabling function that allowed both the Space Valley to apply for the National Science Foundation grant, which we're in, and we're also in a similar grant competition with UTEP, UTEP Aerospace Center. So both Albuquerque and El Paso and the spaceport are working together, two separate grants, probably won't win both. There's a chance neither of us will win either. But because of the spaceport, we're actually competing at the national level, and there's only 16 finalists left on this grant. So very, very exciting. If whatever coalition wins, it's $180 million that can be spent over 5+ years. So it really would be transformative for the region.
Sure. And that's one thing I wanted to talk a little bit about too, is how the spaceport is affecting nearby towns and things like that. I talked to some business owners and things like that who say they haven't seen as much growth as they would have liked to. Are there plans for the spaceport to be a little more open to the public, or to publicize these launches and make it more of a publicized thing to bring more tourism in? Is that something that's on your radar?
Well, that's a hard one because it's a publicly paid for facility, but the actual customers are doing, a lot of times doing things that they don't want their competitors to know about, and they don't want to advertise it. So to capture their business, we have to respect their desire to be confidential and keep their technology proprietary. On the other hand, as a spaceport, we're lucky because we have a customer like Virgin Galactic who, not for every launch, but for many of the launches, they are going to make a big deal of it. For example, if they have some famous person go up on a suborbital launch, they may include a concert, or they may include some other festival or something with that. So I think the public will get access, but it's very, and some of the things we do are risky as well. When we conduct a FAA licensed launch with some of our vertical launch customers, we have to evacuate, say, a 5-mile radius. So maybe the public can be outside that 5-mile radius to watch, but those customers may not even want to advertise the exact day and time of the launch. So it's a hard one. We have had open houses in the past, and we're trying to figure out when we can do that again that won't interfere with Virgin Galactic operations and other customers. But we definitely want the public to know what they've paid for and get a chance to see it every once in a while.
Yes, sir. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Scott McLaughlin is the director of the New Mexico Spaceport Authority. Scott, thanks so much for being here today.
All right, thank you.
That's our time for now. Join us this week on KRWG Radio. Every weekday it's morning edition 5 to 9, fresh air at 11, followed by Here and Now 12 to 2, and All Things Considered 4 to 7. KRWG News is always online at krwg.org. And we'd like to hear from you. Email us with story ideas and video submissions. The address is feedback@nmsu.edu. For all of us at KRWG News, I'm Jonny Coker. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time on Newsmakers.